Georgetown University Center for Business and Public Policy. So I had been unaware, to my chagrin, that the TPP has its own distinctive. No, here's the question. In what ways? In what ways are TPP's dispute resolution provisions different from the WTO's?
Well, so we have an FTA dispute settlement chapter, which is similar to the state-to-state dispute settlement chapter you have at the WTO. There's procedural differences, but like the WTO dispute settlement rules, it's time limited, it's transparent, and it gets to a resolution. You can work out an agreement, but if you can't work out an agreement, you get trade sanctions, and that applies to everything from the commercial side to the labor and environment. There's also the investor state. Is that where you want me to go? So in the investment
Go where you want to go.
in the investment chapter, you know, some 40 years ago, we saw this with investment treaties. Individual companies needed an ability to enforce rules. They had put their capital, their time into a foreign country, and that foreign country could do to them whatever that foreign country wanted. And state-to-state rules, you know, typically were viewed as too politicized. You had to go convince the State Department to take case, and so it developed first in Europe and then brought into U.S. agreements, and there's about 40 of them the U.S. have, so there's 3,000 worldwide. This investor-state dispute settlement, and that is something not in the WTO because the WTO does not have investment protections, and that mechanism, despite a lot of the discussion that there is about it, only really enforces some limited things, sort of basic governance when you're talking about due process, equal protection, fair treatment by your government, things that are in our Constitution, our Administrative Procedure Act. These are basic rules. The outcome of an ISDS investor state case can never overturn any law or regulation, and there has never ever been a case that has found that a non-discriminatory regulation has violated those rules. We could spend hours on this, as Nicole knows, but so let me just stop right there.
Linda, appeals. Does TPP structure an appeals process different from the WTO's? Okay, never mind. We can look at it later.
We'll have to look at that more closely. Get back to you on that one. And I'm gonna just I want to say thank you first to Anku. She's unfortunately has another obligation. If you guys can help me thank her for her time. If you have any further questions, you'll have to catch her, you know, by email. So I did see another hand though. Yes.
Barbara Bowie Whitman, Whitforest Consulting and Whitman Endowment. In an election year, trade agreements are never a popular thing, and it's going to be tough to get adoption. And yet, Lisa was making a point that certain of the benefits that are there in the agreement, if it could be put through and enter into force, are time sensitive and could be lost. So I just wonder what you all are thinking about how the very effective points you make here are going to be presented and can be presented most effectively, particularly to members and people not yet elected who are making loud noises about how badly we negotiate trade agreements, so that this thing will still have a chance to get through.
Move down the line.
Okay, so the politics of trade are tough. we know that, and you know, there are some things in TPP that appeal to folks that come at the issue from opposite directions. So hopefully there will be enough goodness. I feel like in my conversations with staff and members of Congress that there is an acceptance that we don't want to let the perfect be the enemy of good. And that said, there in the election process place we are right now, there's a lot of rhetoric that is not necessarily going to be the rhetoric that we hear later in the election, is my opinion. So my hope is that we could get through the election and come out in the end with a successful passage of TPP.
Well, I think the politics of trade are tough, not because people are stupid, but because the results of past trade agreements have been problematic. And, you know, I think what you see out in the campaign trail is interesting, and I think people should pay a little bit of attention to it. It's always, you know, I've been in a lot of rooms like this in Washington, very comfortable, very prosperous, very secure of the opinions. But the truth is that our economy has really failed working people for the last couple of decades. We have, you know, virtually 90% of the workforce not benefiting from the economic growth and the prosperity that's been there. And a part of it, not the only part, but a part of it has been trade agreements that have made workers insecure, that have made their jobs insecure, that have made their unions insecure, as, you know, companies have used globalization at the bargaining table to deny workers unions, to deny them wage increases, to deny them health benefits, to deny them, you know, bathroom breaks and safety goggles and other things that they need. And the refrain always is, we're in a global economy now, we can go somewhere else, we don't need to do this, that, or the other. And at some point that sinks in and people start to believe it. So I think this is the point that we're at in the United States of America, is that business has been so aggressive in using globalization to beat back workers, to beat back regulations, to attack environmental and consumer protections that might cost money, that, you know, that we're seeing the outcome right now. So I don't know what's going to happen in the election, and, you know, I certainly hope that we can keep the debate around trade on a more substantive basis, not on an emotional or rhetorical basis. But you know, I think also just on the Petrie-Plummer study, which I spent some time looking at over the last couple of days, these huge numbers that are put forward, like if we delay by even 1 year, we will lose $7 billion. Those numbers are really not economically defensible. You know, you can take the present discounted value of anything, of future gains that are expected over the next 15 years, and you can come up with a big number like that. But the truth is that those gains are really tenuous. We're talking about, even under this best case scenario, 0.5% of GDP by the year 2030, assuming full employment, assuming balanced trade. And also, just one thing I would point out, because I think, you know, of all the discussion today, there's a lot of talk about market access and tariffs and so on, but under the Petrie study, for the United States, even that $131 billion of gains by the year 2030, only 5% of that for the United States comes from tariff reduction. The rest is from more amorphous non-tariff barriers and from investment differences. And that's a pretty small amount. So, you know, we can have a lot of anecdotal stories about tariffs that are very high, but according to this economic study, which the administration has been touting a lot, very few of the actual benefits come from the tariffs, and those are the things that are most easily measurable. The non-tariff barriers, if you look at the assumptions that are in that study, are really sort of 75% of all non-tariff barriers and regulations are basically protectionist and don't have any consumer environmental benefit to them at all. And I think that's also a questionable assumption. So I just want to point out that it's not because people aren't paying attention, but because they are, that TPP will have a tough time passing in an election year.